June 1912. Villisca, Iowa, a quintessence of rural Midwest tranquility, where church bells dictated the daily rhythm and kerosene lamps flickered against the encroaching dusk. This was a community woven tight by the threads of familiarity and routine, where every face was known and every door, typically, left unlocked. But in the early hours of one fateful morning, the town would awaken to a reality so brutal, so grotesquely out of step with their simple lives, that it would forever fracture their sense of security. At the heart of this quiet town stood a house that did not wake. Within its walls, 8 souls were claimed by an unseen brutality as they slept. The Moore household, along with their 2 young guests, the Stillinger sisters, became the somber faces of an unspeakable horror. The news, slow to spread in those initial, disbelieving hours, soon trickled out from behind closed doors and whispered conversations. Whole family murdered. The headlines eventually screamed, but not before the town itself had begun to pulse with a fear sharp as the axe left behind at the scene. The promise was clear and chilling. 8 victims, their lives extinguished with merciless precision and no killer identified. Villisca, once a name signifying nothing more than another stop along the railway, now stood as a synonym for massacre, a town remade by fear. The faces in the old photos, once merely echoes of a bygone era, now seemed to carry a weight of foreboding, as if those sepia-toned eyes had always known that peace was but a fragile veneer, one that could be shattered by the swing of an axe in the dead of night. The mystery of that night would unfold without resolution, the whispers of the dead forever sealed behind the boarded-up windows of the Moore residence, leaving only the silent screams of a small town forever scarred by the unknown. As the shadows of the Villisca Axe Murders lengthen across the viewer's imagination, a deeper journey into the heart of this dark tale awaits. Those compelled by the chilling echoes from a past that refuses to lie silent are encouraged to subscribe and share their thoughts. Where does this story find you? In the comfort of a well-lit room, or somewhere shadows flicker at the edges of your vision? Be forewarned, as the narrative delves further into the Moore residence, the details will intensify. The silent walls of the house, the still air heavy with secrets, will speak volumes of the horror that unfolded in the quiet hours of a 1912 summer night. This wasn't folklore. It was carefully hidden testimony waiting to be unearthed from the depths of forgotten whispers and archived fears. The tale grows darker, the night deeper, and the mystery more entangled. In the wake of June 1912, the rural town of Villisca, Iowa, settled under a shroud of normalcy that belied its soon-to-be shattered peace. The town, woven tightly by its Presbyterian ethics and daily rhythms dictated by the chugging of trains and the flicker of kerosene lamps, was a portrait of pre-WWI Midwestern life. Villisca thrived on its predictability, with neighbors priding themselves on knowing each other's business, a trait that lent a sense of security and communal trust. At the heart of this network lay the Moore household, a family well integrated into the fabric of Villisca's daily life. The Moores were regular churchgoers, the father a prominent business owner, and their residence, a modest frame house, was a familiar fixture in the community. The Stillinger sisters, guests in the Moore home on that fateful night, were expected as part of the routine hospitality typical of the time. However, beneath this veneer of community and kinship, there lay unspoken rules and private understandings about what should not be aired in public. The culture of privacy was a double-edged sword. It fostered both a protective closeness and a potentially dangerous silence. This unspoken agreement tested the limits of what neighbors thought they knew about each other, setting the stage for suspicion and paranoia in the aftermath of the murders. The day before the discovery, Villisca basked in the ordinary. Children played in the dusty streets, men discussed crop prices outside the local general store, and women exchanged recipes and local gossip. As night fell, the town's homes glowed softly with the light of kerosene lamps, casting long shadows against the wooden walls. Would you dare spend a night where they never returned? This question, posed in a later recounting by a regional newspaper, echoed the haunting reality that the Moore residents would soon embody. The house, once filled with the mundane joys of family life, was on the verge of becoming a silent witness to a grim tableau. Some secrets bleed through generations, unchanged and unspoken. In Villisca, the events of June 1912 would soon reveal how deeply the roots of fear could entwine a community, as trust in the familiar was irrevocably broken. The murders would not only end lives but also the innocence of a town caught in the grip of an unsolvable mystery, where every whispered secret and half-seen shadow could hold the key to a puzzle that would never find its missing piece. As the sun dipped below the horizon on that fateful evening, the streets of Villisca were quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a horse-drawn carriage or the distant laughter of children playing hide-and-seek in the twilight. The Moore residence, a modest frame house with its neatly trimmed lawn and white picket fence, stood unassuming on the corner of a tree-lined street. Inside, the family and their guests, the Stillinger sisters, had returned from the church program, their minds filled with the evening sermon and the comforting routine of small-town life. But as the town of Villisca slept, something sinister crept through the shadows. By morning, the Moore residence would be transformed into a scene of horrific carnage, a silent testament to an unspeakable act. The discovery of the bodies the next morning sent shockwaves through the community. A local newspaper headline screamed, "Entire family wiped out," capturing the collective horror of a community grappling with the reality of the brutal murders. In the immediate aftermath, a palpable sense of denial gripped Villisca. It was inconceivable to the townsfolk that such brutality could occur in their midst. Whispers of a masked figure began to circulate, a spectral presence seen in the peripheries of the town's consciousness, a convenient embodiment of the evil that had visited them. Children, with the cruel clarity of youth, whispered of a boogeyman, their words carrying an undercurrent of truth that the adults could scarcely acknowledge. The local authorities, overwhelmed and underprepared, floundered in their initial response. The crime scene was compromised by the influx of curious townspeople and poorly documented by the inexperienced police force. Valuable evidence was trampled underfoot or lost in the chaos as the community struggled to understand the magnitude of the tragedy. In a desperate attempt to preserve the integrity of the investigation, certain documents and pieces of evidence were sealed away, hidden from public view. Some archives were deliberately sealed so no one could read this, noted a frustrated official in a private correspondence, hinting at the depth of the town's turmoil and the fear of further unsettling the community. The folklore of the masked figure grew, fed by fear and the human need to make sense of the senseless. It served as a macabre tale to explain the unexplainable, a story that evolved in the telling, each version more elaborate than the last. This figure, faceless and fleeting, became a staple of whispered bedtime stories, a spectral scapegoat for the real human evil that had visited Villisca. As the investigation dragged on with more questions than answers, the fabric of trust that had once bound the community began to unravel. The murders not only stole the lives of 8 souls, but also the innocence of a town that would never again feel safe in its own homes. The shadows grew longer in Villisca, and the night, once a time for rest and peace, became a curtain behind which any number of horrors might hide. In the early morning hours following the church program, a sinister quiet settled over the Moore residence in Villisca, Iowa. The discovery of the bodies on that fateful June morning in 1912 sent shockwaves through the small community, previously cocooned by its mundane routines and neighborly surveillance. The local newspaper headline screamed silently from the press, "Entire family slain, murderer at large." The Moore household, along with the visiting Stillinger sisters, had been brutally murdered, their lives extinguished by a chillingly methodical use of an axe. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the blood-stained floors, the community's initial disbelief turned to horror. The Moore residence, a typical family home, had transformed overnight into a macabre scene of mass murder. The details that emerged were grotesque yet precise. All victims had been found in their beds, heads covered with bedclothes, faces smashed beyond recognition. The mirrors and windows within the house had been covered with cloths and sheets, a detail that whispered of a calculated attempt to obscure more than just the identity of the assailant. An axe belonging to Josiah Moore was found in the guest room, smeared with blood, its usual place by the woodpile abandoned. This ordinary tool, now a weapon of profound violence, hinted at a premeditated malice, a personal invasion that turned the sanctuary of home into a tomb. The local authorities, overwhelmed and underprepared, floundered in their efforts to secure the crime scene. Villisca's small police force was ill-equipped for a tragedy of this magnitude, their inexperience manifesting in a chaotic preservation of evidence. The crime scene quickly became a spectacle, with residents and the morbidly curious trampling through the Moore residence, each step erasing potential leads. Amidst the turmoil, a curfew was hastily enacted, an attempt by the town officials to regain some semblance of control. Nightfall brought a suffocating blanket of fear. Doors were locked and windows shuttered as families clung to the fragile assurance of safety in numbers. The streets of Villisca, once lively with the comings and goings of neighborly visits, grew deserted as dusk approached, the community's trust eroding under the weight of suspicion and dread. The law called it superstition when whispered rumors of a curse began to circulate, a desperate attempt by the townsfolk to rationalize the irrational. Yet, to those who had seen the horror firsthand, who had touched the cold silence of a home-turned grave, these were not mere superstitions, but the harrowing truth of evil's capacity to breach any defense. In the days following the murders, every document that might have offered a clue, every piece of evidence that could have whispered a name, was treated with a mix of reverence and fear. "Every document burned left behind a darker shadow," remarked a somber town elder, reflecting on the attempts to cleanse the town of its nightmarish reality through fire and forgetfulness. But the shadows lingered, growing darker with each passing day as the community grappled with the knowledge that the killer walked among them, his identity shrouded in the same darkness that he had drawn over his victims. How many more secrets like this still rot under American soil? This question haunted the once peaceful streets of Villisca as the town found itself eternally altered, its narrative rewritten by an act of such ferocious intimacy that it left an indelible mark on the soul of the community. The Villisca Axe Murders remained a chilling testament to the fragility of small-town idols, a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most familiar of faces and within the most secure of homes. As the news of the Villisca Axe Murders spread beyond the confines of the small town, regional newspapers began to arrive, their headlines screaming of the brutality in a once peaceful community. "Entire family slain in nighttime massacre," one broadsheet declared, the words casting a long, dark shadow over the town of Villisca. The press, with their relentless inquiries and sensational reports, only served to amplify the growing climate of fear and suspicion among the townsfolk. With the arrival of outside investigators, Villisca transformed overnight from a quiet rural town into a spectacle of morbid curiosity. Strangers roamed the streets, their presence a constant reminder that the horror which had visited Villisca was of national concern. The local authorities, overwhelmed and underprepared for the flood of attention, found their efforts scrutinized and often contradicted by the more experienced detectives from larger cities. This friction between jurisdictions only added to the chaos, each side guarding its own theories and suspects jealously. In the wake of the murders, the residents of Villisca took their safety into their own hands. Gun sales surged as men and women alike felt the pressing need to protect themselves from a threat that remained unseen but was all too real. The local hardware store, usually concerned with the sale of farm implements and building supplies, now found itself dealing almost exclusively in firearms and ammunition. A grim testament to the palpable fear that gripped the community. Survival accounts from neighboring towns where similar but less fatal attacks had occurred began to surface. These narratives, filled with close calls and narrow escapes, were traded among Villisca's residents with a fervent urgency. Each story was dissected for clues, for patterns that might reveal the identity of the killer still at large. "The closer you look, the less coincidence explains," murmured a wary townsperson, reflecting a growing sentiment that these were not isolated incidents but the work of a serial menace. The silence of officials was louder than any scream. As days turned into weeks with no arrest, the initial shock of the murders gave way to a smoldering anger and distrust towards those in charge. Promises of swift justice and reassurances of safety seemed empty against the backdrop of ongoing uncertainty and fear. The more details that emerged, the more the community wished for ignorance, each gruesome fact a reminder of the night when death walked through Villisca. As autumn approached, the leaves began to turn and the days grew shorter. The shadow of the axe murders grew only longer and darker. Villisca, once a town defined by its church bells and neighborly chats, now found itself bound by whispered suspicions and the unspoken agreement to keep children indoors after dusk. The fabric of the community had been irrevocably altered, the innocence of small-town life shattered by the harsh intrusion of inexplicable evil. Each new rumor, each reported sighting of a suspicious character was a spark in the powder keg of nerves that Villisca had become. The community, united in grief, found itself paradoxically divided, every man a potential suspect, every shadow a cause for alarm. The investigation, with its twists and turns, seemed only to deepen the mystery, leaving a scar on the heart of a town forever changed by one unfathomable night of violence. As the investigation into the Villisca Axe murders dragged on, the regional press, ever hungry for a headline, began to refer to the perpetrator as the Phantom Killer. This moniker, chilling and evocative, captured the imagination of the public and the frustration of law enforcement. The killer had vanished as if into thin air, leaving behind only the gruesome tableau at the Moore residence as evidence of his existence. In the weeks following the murders, numerous suspects were apprehended, only to be released when their alibis held under scrutiny. Each arrest was initially met with a collective breath held by the town, followed by a sigh of disappointment as another lead turned cold. The local newspapers, filled with speculative theories and sensationalist reports, did little to calm the public's nerves. Headlines screamed of a killer on the loose, potentially harboring a vendetta against the town itself, each theory wilder than the last. The law called it superstition. Survivors called it truth. This sentiment became a whispered mantra among those who lived in the shadow of the tragedy. Some residents claimed to have seen figures lurking near the Moore house on subsequent nights, or to have heard footsteps in their attics. Rational explanations did not satisfy. The community felt haunted, watched over by a malevolence that had not yet finished its business in Villisca. Amidst the growing paranoia, the local authorities were overwhelmed. Desperate for any assistance, they reached out to the state, requesting the involvement of the Rangers, a request that underscored the severity of the situation. The arrival of these seasoned investigators brought a new level of scrutiny to the case. They re-examined the crime scene, poring over the house and the surrounding areas with a meticulousness that the initial response had lacked. However, even the Rangers found themselves stymied by the cunning of the phantom killer. The rail schedules and alibis of various suspects introduced a dizzying array of possibilities and dead ends. "The closer you look, the less coincidence explains," remarked one frustrated Ranger, his statement later quoted in a somber newspaper piece. Each clue seemed only to deepen the mystery, weaving a more tangled web where truth and speculation became indistinguishable. Throughout this period, the townspeople of Villisca lived in a state of heightened alert. The press, with their relentless updates and grim conjectures, kept the fear palpable. They told the public nothing but survivors remembered everything. This headline captured the essence of the town's plight. A community bound by shared trauma, their faith in safety and normalcy shattered. As autumn deepened, the leaves turning to gold and then to brown, the specter of the unsolved murders loomed larger. Villisca, once a place where doors remained unlocked and faces were familiar, had transformed. Every stranger was scrutinized, every unexplained noise a cause for alarm. The phantom killer, a ghostly presence crafted by press and public fear alike, seemed to mock the efforts of those seeking justice. The investigation continued, a slow, grinding process that yielded more questions than answers. The Rangers, despite their expertise, could not cut through the knot of alibis and false leads. The community, once hopeful for a swift resolution, began to resign itself to a more unsettling possibility, that the killer might never be found and that the horror which had visited them that night in June might forever remain an enigma, as elusive and chilling as a phantom in the fog. As the leaves fell, whispering secrets of decay along the quiet streets of Villisca, the town's somber mood deepened under the weight of unresolved terror. The Moore residence, once filled with the light laughter of a family, now stood as a grim monument to the unknown, its dark windows mirroring the haunted gazes of passers-by. If these chilling details unsettle you, consider sharing this story and subscribing for more as we prepare to delve deeper into the darkest corners of this mystery. In the hushed conversations at the market or the uneasy silences at the church, the community's bond, once its strength, now served as a shared shroud of fear. The old photos from town archives, eyes of the past residents staring out, seemed to whisper accusations or perhaps secrets too dreadful to voice. Their expressions, frozen in time, hinted at a deeper narrative, as if they knew the horror that would befall the house on that fateful night. As Villisca braced itself against the biting wind of November, the story of the Axe Murders, like the cold, found its way into every home, urging all to lock their doors at dusk. The press, relentless in their pursuit of the truth, continued to churn out theories and tales of the phantom killer, each headline a stark reminder of the safety they once took for granted. Yet, as the investigation dragged on, the killer's shadow only grew longer over the town, its outline blurring between fact and fable. Prepare then to follow us further into the abyss, as we soon explore the very rooms where tragedy struck, seeking answers in the silent witnesses of wood and glass. The journey ahead promises little solace, but perhaps, in understanding the darkness, we might find a flicker of light. Share this journey, subscribe to the silence, and remember the faces in the old photos are watching, waiting for the story to unfold. As the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders deepened, the town found itself under an unspoken siege. Curfews, once merely a protective whisper among the wary, became a mandated silence that blanketed the streets as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. The local authorities, overwhelmed and desperate for leads, initiated a series of large-scale sweeps across Villisca. Men in coats, their faces grim and determined, moved through the town like ghosts, their presence a constant reminder of the horror that had visited and still lingered. The house itself, the scene of such incomprehensible violence, stood silent and brooding, its dark windows like blind eyes watching over a town gripped by fear. Investigators, their steps cautious and reverent, traversed the sequence of rooms, each step a descent deeper into the heart of the mystery. The order of the rooms, the sequence of blows, each detail was scrutinized under the harsh light of kerosene lamps, searching for the silent testimony of wood and glass. The axe, found in the house, its blade smeared with the stark, undeniable evidence of its use, was examined and re-examined, as if it might yield more than just the horror it had wrought. Behind every locked door lies a reason it was locked. This whispered sentiment became the unvoiced mantra of every household. Doors were not just barriers against the night, they were shields against a deeper, darker tide that threatened to engulf them all. Families huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, the weight of their fear a palpable presence in the cramped rooms of their homes. In this climate of heightened vigilance, decoy patrols and stakeouts became the norm. The night air was filled with the sound of footsteps and the soft murmur of voices as officers walked their beats, their eyes darting into shadows, searching for something amiss. The town, once a tapestry of open doors and neighborly smiles, transformed into a tableau of suspicion and survival. The press, ever hungry for details, printed updates with a frenetic pace, each headline adding layers to the legend that Villisca was becoming. "Phantom killer eludes police," one headline declared, capturing the elusive nature of the threat that haunted them. This wasn't folklore, it was carefully hidden testimony, etched into the very fabric of the town. Each whispered rumor, each sidelong glance carried weight. They were fragments of a story pieced together in the quiet, fearful gatherings of a community bound by tragedy. Every family in town whispered, but none spoke aloud. Their voices were reserved for the privacy of their homes, where they could express their fears without the burden of their neighbors' dread-filled gazes. As the investigation pressed on, the ritual feel of the crime scene, the covered mirrors, the neatly placed sheets, the deliberate positioning of the axe suggested a mind governed by a chilling, methodical intent. The investigators, poring over notes and photographs, maps and timetables, sought to discern a pattern, a clue that might lead them to the architect of such brutality. Yet, with each passing day, the mystery only deepened, the killer's identity as elusive as the shifting shadows on the streets of Villisca. The town waited, breath held, for a resolution that seemed increasingly out of reach. The promise of safety, once taken for granted, now hung in the balance, its fragility exposed by the stark reality of the unsolved crimes. As the cold wind of November continued to sweep through Villisca, the community braced itself against the unknown, each locked door a testament to the terror that walked among them, unseen but deeply felt. As the autumn of 1912 deepened, the shadows in Villisca grew longer and the list of suspects longer still. The investigation, initially concentrated within the immediate vicinity of the Moore residence, expanded with a fervor driven by public clamor and the press's relentless pursuit of the sensational. Each new headline seemed to promise an answer that eluded those most desperate for resolution. Among the names that circulated were transient laborers, disgruntled townsfolk, and even distant relatives, each scrutinized under the town's microscope of suspicion. A traveling preacher, known for his fire and brimstone sermons, briefly became the focus of intense scrutiny when a local recalled his unsettling presence at the church service, attended by the Moore family hours before their demise. "Preacher with a past haunts Villisca dreams," screamed a regional headline, yet the evidence amounted to little more than circumstantial whispers. Another suspect, a known criminal with a record of petty thefts across the state, was apprehended when a bloody shirt was discovered in his possession. The town held its breath as the garment was sent for examination. Days later, the report deflated the burgeoning hope. The stains were not human blood, but that of an animal, likely a chicken he had stolen and slaughtered for food. The deeper the investigators dug, the more the ground itself seemed to whisper uncertainties back at them. The legal proceedings that followed were as fraught as the investigations. Preliminary hearings overflowed with spectators, each person clinging to every word, every piece of evidence presented, as if trying to solve the puzzle themselves. Yet the outcomes were invariably the same, inconclusive. The suspects were released one by one, their connections to the crime deemed insufficient or purely speculative. The community's frustration mounted, the phantom of the murderer dissolving into mere rumor and legend. In this atmosphere charged with suspicion and fear, even the spiritual leaders found themselves at a loss. Reports emerged of priests who, despite their roles as shepherds of their flocks, refused to cross the threshold of the Moore house. When even priests refused to enter, you knew something lingered, noted an elderly parishioner, her voice barely above a whisper, echoing the community's palpable dread. The children of Villisca, too, sensed the deepening mystery, their innocence marred by the dark tales that now formed the fabric of their daily lives. They played less frequently in the twilight hours, their games finishing as the sun set, not daring to challenge the night. They whispered among themselves, repeating stories overheard from hushed conversations of adults, their versions filled with imagined specters more frightening than reality could conjure. As winter approached, the once warm and inviting homes of Villisca stood stark against the chilling winds. Their windows shuttered early, their doors bolted tight. The town, once a tapestry of neighborly bonds, now resembled a patchwork of mistrust and fear. Each passing day without resolution to the murders wove another thread of silence into the community's heart. The case of the Villisca Axe Murders, with its myriad suspects and dearth of conclusive evidence, gradually receded from the urgent clamor to a haunting enigma. It lingered in the collective memory of the town, a somber legend passed down through generations, a chilling reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring shadow of unexplained evil. In the wake of the Villisca Axe Murders, the town's heartbeat slowed to a morose, lingering thud. The streets, once bustling with the innocuous chatter of daily commerce and neighborly greetings, now echoed with a hushed, uneasy silence. The local newspaper, which had once filled its pages with community events and local achievements, now frequently revisited the grim details of that fateful night in June 1912, its ink seemingly stained with the town's collective sorrow. Anniversary of Villisca tragedy brings town to standstill, one headline declared, a stark reminder of the unresolved horror that lingered like a persistent fog. Each year, as the date approached, the community rituals that had been disrupted by the tragedy attempted to resume, albeit with a palpable tension. Doors that had never known locks now clicked shut each evening, and windows that had once framed the serene Iowa landscape were now often curtained against unseen threats. The Moore house, the epicenter of the horror, became a reluctant monument to the town's darkest hour. Curiosity seekers and those with a macabre interest in the supernatural began to trickle into Villisca, drawn by tales of the brutal murders. The local economy, moribund after the tragedy, saw a grim opportunity. Guided tours of the Moore residence began, the guides recounting the sequence of events in hushed tones, their words floating through the still rooms like specters. History recorded nothing, but the walls kept count. Each group that passed through the house left with a sense of the heavy despair that seemed to permeate the very timber. Photographs taken by visitors occasionally showed more than just the stark, empty rooms. Some claimed to capture vague outlines or mists, interpretations of presence where none should exist. These images circulated and recirculated, added layers to the legend, each retelling a further embellishment of the haunting. The files on the murders remained stubbornly open, a series of dusty folders in the town clerk's office, their contents a testament to the exhaustive and ultimately fruitless investigations that followed the crime. Suspects had been named and then dismissed. Leads followed only to dead ends, and theories proposed only to be debunked. The lack of resolution served only to deepen the lore, the true story of what happened that night, becoming ever more entangled with speculative fiction. Tourism, driven by a fascination with the macabre, slowly transformed Villisca. The town's identity became inextricably linked with the murders. Souvenir shops sprang up, selling replicas of old newspaper clippings and eerie postcards of the Moore house. Every October, the town hosted a mystery weekend, where amateur sleuths gathered to review the case and propose new theories. The event culminated in a candlelit vigil at the house, a somber acknowledgement of the lives lost and the lingering ache of the unknown. What if this story was erased from history on purpose? The thought whispered through the community, a chilling consideration of the power of unspeakable acts to alter the fabric of reality. Perhaps, some conjectured, the true horror was not just the brutality of the murders, but the possibility that such darkness could ever be fully expunged from collective memory. As the years turned into decades, the Moore house stood as a somber sentinel, its history a patchwork of fact and folklore. The town of Villisca, forever marked by the tragedy, found a strange solace in its notorious legacy. The unresolved questions, the endless what-ifs, continued to haunt the residents, a ghostly presence woven into the very essence of the town. The story of the Villisca Axe Murders, unresolved and chilling, remained a dark testament to the enigma of evil, echoing through the generations with the persistent, unsettling question: what lurks in the shadows of forgotten crimes? In the shadows of the ordinary, the extraordinary breeds its darkest fears. Villisca, a name once synonymous with quiet Midwestern life, now echoes as a chilling reminder of how common places can cradle uncommon horrors. The Moore residence, a simple family home, transformed overnight into a crypt of unsolved mysteries and whispered dread. It stands not just as a monument to the lives tragically extinguished within its walls, but as a stark symbol of the human psyche's fragile peace, shattered by the mere possibility of lurking malevolence. As the narrative of the Villisca Axe Murders folds into the fabric of local lore, the question persists: what is more terrifying? The gruesome reality of the crime, or the ease with which such a horror fades into the backdrop of daily life? The Moore house, preserved and peered into by the curious and the brave, serves as a grim gallery of the past, each visitor stepping closer to the veil that separates the known from the unknowable. This case, unresolved and echoing through the corridors of time, challenges the observer to consider not only what happened, but also what might yet occur in the unassuming corners of their own worlds. It is here, in the contemplation of potential darkness, within the mundane, that true horror resides. If the shadows of Villisca intrigue you, brace yourself for the next journey into the heart of historical darkness. Subscribe and prepare to explore another quiet corner of the world, where secrets wait silently, ready to whisper their stories to those daring enough to listen. In our next exploration, we will unravel a tale where the echoes of the past are not just heard, but felt, a story that promises to chill even the most seasoned seeker of truths hidden in plain sight.